Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to Teleworkforce, which is the inaugural Infoxchange conference. KPMG is delighted to host you here this afternoon, and particularly welcomes the other major supporters of the day, being Microsoft and Telstra. I'd like to acknowledge our conference is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. My name is Malcolm Alder. I'm partner for digital economy at KPMG, and I'll be your MC for the afternoon. Now, in addition to all of those who've joined us here in Melbourne, in the proper spirit of National Telework Week, we are running this as a webinar, so hopefully there are plenty of people there watching us in other parts of the country or indeed around the world. So a very warm welcome to all of you as well. As the originator of this conference, Infoxchange is uniquely placed to take a lead role in the emergence and development of telework in Australia. It's been helping not-for-profit organisations and the disadvantaged communities to embrace the benefits of the digital economy for several years, and we'll shortly hear from their CEO, Peter Walton. As we'll discuss today, telework presents both opportunities and challenges for Australia, especially as we contemplate a high-speed national broadband network. And the not-for-profit sector has a key role to play in terms of ensuring that the benefits of telework and broader digital engagement are available to all. Now, as with Microsoft and Telstra, KPMG is a proud and enthusiastic participant in National Telework Week, and indeed with the only large professional services firm who's signed on with the department as an official partner. KPMG also has a comprehensive and deep commitment to sustainability and a workplace of the future agenda. And we're also very proud and passionate supporters of the not-for-profit sector. And in financial year 2012, our people provided more than 16,000 hours of honorary work in the sector. Now, I shan't go into the agenda in detail. It's all set out in your comprehensive booklet that you have there. And you can read the bios and all the featured speakers. But what I will say is that we've tried to cover this topic from a number of complementary perspectives. So you'll hear about enhancing productivity, better use of technology, and exploring the cultural aspects of leadership and change in this space. In particular, given the great majority of you from the not-for-profit sector in all its dimensions, we'll be keen to unearth how technology and teleworking in particular can have a positive social impact through every part of our society, including practical advice on what you can take away and start doing differently tomorrow to make more of a reality for your organisations and the individuals that you support. Now, in doing this, we'll be drawing on technologists, an economist, an HR professional, and business leaders who care deeply about the organisations that they run, and more importantly, the stakeholders that they benefit. Now, as you can see, there'll be a tea break at 2:30. For those of you online, you can have a cup of tea anytime you like, as long as you stay listening. And a chance to network over drinks at the end of the event at around 5 o'clock, although unfortunately those of you in the virtual world, that's one thing we can't yet do through teleworking, but you never know in the fullness of time. You can stay connected real time through social media, and we've got Mark and Tegan monitoring things. You can see on the screen here our Twitter tag for the afternoon is TW capital letters Force, and there's also the ongoing National Telework Week hashtag, which is NTWAU. So please do get engaged, and those in the room, if we see you glancing down slightly, no one will be offended. That's one of the joys of the modern world of digital technology and social media. Now, in addition to those wide-ranging skills that I mentioned already, I'm delighted to say that we also have a minister opening proceedings for us this afternoon. Senator Stephen Conroy is Minister for Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy, and he's also the Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Digital Productivity. So as well as having quite a large business card, he's a very busy man and a very important man in the future of the digital economy for Australia. In the true spirit of sponsoring National Telework Week, I'm delighted to say that members of Minister Conroy's Department of Broadband, are with us here this afternoon. But in keeping with teleworking, Minister Conroy will start proceedings to us with a message that he's delivered using the technology. Thank you.
I apologise for not being with you in person today. It's perhaps acceptable to use technology to join you in Telework Week. Infoxchange was one of my department's first telework partners. You have provided knowledge, tools and services necessary to make remote working the way of the future. Indeed, this event covers enhancing productivity and embracing technology and change. These are central to the government's telework objectives. I note that your conference objectives include education on teleworking, showcasing its role and supporting technological advancement. Demonstrating how telework can transform the not-for-profit sector is an important educative task. Showcasing the role of teleworking in social inclusion is being supported by facilitating social media discussions from here, broadcasting them live to your website. Technological advances such as cloud computing-based tools as an enabler to community access to telework are particularly important for the not-for-profit sector. Your support for these advances will greatly aid the sector. You set a good example. I'm advised that more than 20% of Infoxchange employees telework full-time. Access Economics has estimated that if 10% of the Australian workforce were to telework 50% of the time, it would save an estimated 120 million litres of fuel, take 320,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere, reduce traffic at peak periods by 5%, deliver $470 million worth of congestion cost savings per annum, and lead to an annual gain in productivity in the order of $1.4 billion to $1.9 billion. And telework is central to the environmental benefits at the core of the $43 billion a year not-for-profit sector. The many other benefits to organisations include increased workforce flexibility, an expanded supply of skilled labour, less stress from traffic congestion, greater work-life balance, and with cost savings and productivity gains. A recent Stanford University study revealed that people who work from home were 13% more productive than people working in an office. The National Broadband Network provides an ideal opportunity to enable digital productivity by increasing the level of telework for many Australians. Universal high-speed broadband connectivity to all premises will dramatically enhance video conferencing and the telework experience. While productivity is the key to the entire economy, its impact is especially relevant to the NFP sector. To quote your CEO, Peter Walton, telework can be transformative for the not-for-profit sector, where achieving efficiencies and workforce flexibility can translate into tangible benefits in pursuit of a social mission. Telework is about how people work, interact with, and prepare for an increasingly changing world. Here's a model example. Robert Carlson, manager of Infoxchange Service Seeker function, started as a database updater with Infoxchange. She now manages a team of 14 teleworkers, and here's what she says. Teleworking has helped us to retain our experienced staff because our team can balance their home and work life. Before I started teleworking, it cost about $400 per month in overheads at the office, just to cover the office space, the electricity, the internet, and the phone. Now, we pay staff $50 per month to cover the tools they need to get their job done at home. My own department, in collaboration with Deloitte Access Economics, has developed a useful online application, the Telework Return on Investment, or TRI tool. It's designed to calculate the potential savings a company could make by taking part in the coming anywhere working revolution. Any individual or business can use it to model the potential impact of telework on an organisation. Have a look at the tool by visiting www.telework.gov.au. It also offers useful information on the benefits of working from home using the NBN. And while you're on the website during National Telework Week, consider, like Infoxchange, becoming one of our growing network of telework partners. So, again, congratulations to Infoxchange for its work in championing the telework dimension in the important not-for-profit sector and community sector. Again, thank you for your influence in changing working behaviour, increasing accessibility and supporting the technology advances needed to increase teleworking in the community. I commend your digital inclusion activities, your grassroots projects that help people to access the digital age. I wish Infoxchange and this event well, and I look forward to receiving your ongoing feedback as to how telework is fulfilling its potential for Australia. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Minister. In absentia, please pass on our regards through the department for the Minister taking the time to prepare that for us and getting us in the right headspace for the afternoon. And with that, he's already quoted the man, so let's hear from the man himself. I'm delighted to welcome as our first speaker the CEO of Infoxchange Australia, Peter Walton.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for coming to Infoxchange's inaugural conference, Teleworkforce. I would like to start by acknowledging our sponsors for the day. It's a great delight for us to work closely with both Microsoft and KPMG. Both have been instrumental in making this event possible. Infoxchange Australia is a social enterprise that provides services that enable a more digitally inclusive and empowered society. We work to bridge the digital divide, especially for the most disadvantaged parts of Australia. We also work to strengthen the efficiency and the effectiveness of the not-for-profit sector through their use of information communication technology. Infoxchange has a deep involvement in telework, and that involvement's threefold. Firstly, for over 18 years, we have been a practitioner of telework. We haven't always called it telework. It's been called all manner of things, remote workers, telecommuters, but our staff were basically practicing telework for this period of time, insofar as they conducted their work from a place other than the office. Infoxchange is also an advocate and a facilitator of telework within the not-for-profit sector. We assist organisations to embrace and utilise the information communication technologies that make telework easier and also more productive. And finally, a passion, I guess, is our vision is technology for social justice. And in this regard, telework is very well aligned, not least because it has the potential to contribute to greater inclusiveness when it comes to employment participation and social impact. Today, I'm keen to set the scene by sharing our experience and providing some observations around telework and its importance for the not-for-profit sector. I've been giving a few presentations in the lead up to a National Telework Week, and in preparing for these, a number of news articles caught my eye. In August, a report by NRMA revealed that almost a quarter of Sydney commuters spend more time commuting to work each year than they actually do on annual leave, 22 days. Earlier this week, ironically at the start of National Telework Week, the RACV was calling here in Melbourne for a solution to Melbourne's growing traffic gridlock. The car insurer has a $7 billion wish list of 150 proposed transport projects around Melbourne. What struck me as interesting in both of these cases was that there was virtually no discussion of telework and limited discussion of alternatives to commuting. Whilst I am not disputing the need for better and appropriate infrastructure, I think the media coverage in this case demonstrated that the national understanding and acceptance of telework as an alternative model is still very much in its embryonic stages. Here in Australia, we clearly lag behind the telework levels of many other countries. Telework used to be promoted for family values and work-life balance, and these remain critical, of course. But there is a growing momentum and strong evidence demonstrating a business case and an environmental case. And I believe there is also a compelling social inclusion case for telework. And our event this afternoon will explore how telework can make a difference in the not-for-profit sector and also in terms of its contribution to positive social outcomes. So let me start with briefly talking about Infoxchange's telework experience. And I certainly won't spend a lot of time here because one thing is very clear. Our experience and our research into this is very closely aligned with the growing body of research from around the world that supports telework. 20% of our overall employees are fully engaged on telework agreements. Another 25% of our staff practice telework casually, sometimes once a month, sometimes once a week, myself included. Over 60% of our teleworkers live more than 20 kilometres from our head office. 38% live more than 40 kilometres away. One lives in Queensland, a few live in regional Victoria. The average age of the team is just under 40. 64% are over the age of 45. So why is telework good for our employees? Well, this is why. First and foremost is the possibility of better work-life balance. Being better able to balance work and personal commitments because of optimally using downtime, such as lunch breaks or tea breaks, is seen as a big advantage. And the time saved by avoiding a daily commute is greatly valued, especially with the flexibility that that provides in terms of picking up kids at school, for example. All of our teleworkers cited work-life balance as the most important benefit in terms of the telework arrangements that they have. They also reported that telework enhanced their overall sense of job satisfaction and reported improved satisfaction, improved morale and improved motivation. They also saved money in terms of avoiding the commute, avoiding petrol costs and parking costs, which, like everything else, seems to be escalating here in Australia. Telework enables us, through geographically remote staff, it enables our employees to gain employment with an organisation that can align with their values, their beliefs and their professional goals, rather than just taking a job which is available in their local area. This is especially important for the not-for-profit sector, which is largely values-driven. Put simply, telework can provide choice. Despite the benefits, our research revealed numerous challenges. For Infoxchange, this includes isolation. Combating isolation is one of our biggest challenges around telework. Remote workers often don't get the chance for that water cooler chinwag with colleagues that are office-based. So we have to spend a lot of time keeping staff connected to the workplace, including socially. This is really important, and out of sight most certainly shouldn't mean out of mind. Another challenge is the perceived and sometimes real limitations around career development, although this is also being addressed with improvements in technologies such as e-learning. Our team also reported the challenge of disconnecting from work. A teleworker's home is no longer just their home, it is also their place of work. And disconnecting requires considerable self-discipline. Recently, I was a guest on an ABC radio program, and it was a talkback show, and it was about telework, and one caller called in to talk about his self-discipline and his highly effective telework experience. This included getting up, getting dressed for work, going out to the driveway, getting in his car, driving round the block, driving back to his driveway, getting out of his car, walking past his house to his converted office at the bottom of the garden, and then getting on with his day's work. He concluded by saying that if his wife wants to talk with him, she has to ring up and make an appointment like everybody else. Now, I guess it is horses for courses, but I think telework does require self-discipline. The final challenge our teleworkers identified was a lack of support and awareness from friends and family that didn't actually respect the fact that just because they were at home, they were working. And this raises a critical point in my mind, that the perception and culture of telework has a long way to go. In the lead up to the recent London Olympic Games, fearing congestion, the London Transport Authority ran a campaign to try to get 1/3 of London commuters to work from home during the duration of the Games. Those doubting telework said that this sent out a message that Britain was closed for business. And the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, like him or loathe him, went on to say that he thought telework was a skiver's paradise. And he said, and I have to quote this one, "We all know that it is basically sitting, wondering whether to go down to the fridge to hack off that last piece of cheese before checking your personal emails again." Fortunately, the growing evidence base for telework will overtake such doubting Thomases. And I'm really delighted that Nikki Hutley from KPMG will share some of her findings in this regard today. Now, telework has also been highly successful for Infoxchange, not just for our employees, but in terms of our own productivity. Firstly, we attract really high caliber staff. All of our Infoxchange teleworkers have tertiary qualifications. As the team is not constrained by geographical location, we're able to attract really high quality employees, especially those that have a passion for our mission, technology for social justice. The team is also predominantly female, and many are mothers returning to formal employment but unable to commit to full-time office-based work. We also have fantastic results in terms of employee retention. Within our team, 25% of our telework staff have worked for the organisation for more than 10 years. The average length of service is 6.5 years, more than double the rate than at our head office. And thirdly, we have quantified considerable productivity gains and cost savings as a result of telework. Now, across Australia, you may have heard the statistic that 7 out of 10 people believe they are more productive when working remotely. This is certainly aligns with our findings. Our teleworkers all reported feeling much more efficient at home, and one quote in particular intrigued me. "A day in the office, for me, makes me feel like I have achieved nothing, and I would normally come home and work another 4 hours to make up the lost time." That person's here today. I won't mention who she is. On average, our teleworkers also take less sick days than office-based employees at a ratio of 1 to 2. I think this doesn't necessarily suggest that they get sick less, but it certainly suggests that they probably still do a little bit of work whilst they are sick. But importantly at Infoxchange, productivity is not just perceived. We employ a performance management system which measures performance based on output and outcome, not presenteeism, not time in the office. I'm certainly an ardent supporter of the often quoted notion that work is what you do, not where you do it. And I think we really need, as leaders within the not-for-profit sector, move away from the archaic model where we feel a compulsion to literally watch workers do work. All not-for-profit organisations need to ensure the effective use and utilisation of resources. I think we're all very familiar with the headlines that expose Australian cities, especially Melbourne and Sydney, as being more expensive than London or New York. Whilst this is sometimes an oversimplification, the cost of wastage within an organisation is often high. Up to half of the desks in many offices are often vacant at any point during the day. In the sector, we need to think differently because we don't need to pay the additional overheads for maintaining empty desks. This afternoon, Rose Clements from Microsoft will talk about the mobile workforce and activity-based work arrangements at Microsoft to give us some ideas of what we could consider. Our own success in telework is very much based around embracing technology. Infoxchange is fully cloud-based. All of our team members are connected to a set of cloud services, including Office 365, and an online client relationship management system that we customised with the support of Microsoft for the not-for-profit sector. We have communication and storage services linking the whole team in terms of anywhere access to email, calendars, document sharing, instant messaging and video conferencing. Our staff meetings in head office now utilise Microsoft Link, involving all of our remote staff at negligible cost. This technology will be demonstrated today by Microsoft and Generation E. We have been working with Microsoft for over 10 years to bring the very solutions that we ourselves use to the not-for-profit sector at cost-effective levels thanks to significant donations and discounted pricing. The transformation for many organisations has been considerable, as the quotes on the screen attest. Newer technologies such as cloud services are also proving especially important in terms of business continuity and disaster recovery, an area not so unrelated to the concept of telework. We are working in New Zealand with the Ministry of Social Development to help build the capacity of not-for-profit organisations in and around Christchurch following the earthquakes. At the time of the earthquakes, many of these organisations were the very ones that wanted to mobilise quickly to assist with the recovery. Yet sadly, in many cases, these organisations had lost their servers and were immobilised for a longer period of time. A key lesson for them has been structuring their ICT for secure backup and security, but also so that critical frontline workers are able to work from anywhere at any time. I would like to conclude with some observations around the links between telework and having a more digitally inclusive Australia. Telework has the power to contribute to a more socially inclusive society by providing opportunities for people who would otherwise find it difficult to find employment. These people include seniors and those with a disability who may find it difficult to travel. It includes people in remote communities who can't find work in their chosen field or their local area. And also parents and carers whose responsibilities outside of work affect their availability and their schedules. It is estimated that 340,000 Australian adults are currently out of the workforce for reasons that could be remedied by telework. But this still requires a pretty significant cultural shift to ensure that the potential of telework is equitable. Whilst the potential is great, it is critically important that more is done to overcome the barriers for entry for those wishing to engage in telework. This means ensuring equality of bandwidth connectivity, ensuring it's accessible and affordable. It also means ensuring that all Australians are equipped with the skills to digitally participate. There are currently 1.8 million households not connected in Australia. That's around 4 million people. Importantly, even those connected do not necessarily possess the skills to fully engage, either personally or professionally. We need to ensure that the potential of telework is not simply about employment flexibility for those people that already have jobs. It needs to be about opening the possibilities for greater employment participation for those who would find getting work in an office environment difficult or impossible. Telework can and will be transformative in my mind. In fact, Australia's economic productivity in an Asian century in many ways depends upon it. It depends upon much better utilisation of the resources that are already available. And whilst telework may not be a panacea for all challenges around productivity and inclusion, failure to consider it and to embrace it, in my mind, will simply reinforce much of what is not working in the traditional workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Clearly a very well considered and thought through piece, giving us an insight into Infoxchange and how it works and the benefits it sees as a small organisation, so at the micro level, but also teeing up the opportunities and prospects if we can extract them at a macro level, which is a perfect lead in to extend the macro level. I should say, actually, we also had the first doubting Boris moment that I've come across. Maybe there'll be some more of those during the afternoon. But it tees up very nicely to think about the bigger picture of what the potential of this holds at a macroeconomic level. And so to take that further forward, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce my colleague and the Chief Economist at KPMG, Nikki Hutley.
I was fortunate enough to spend 5 days in Bali. I flew back in yesterday morning, actually, and so I'm still a little bit jet-lagged. And I did suggest to KPMG as part of our teleworking week that they might like to extend the experience so I could prolong my holiday in Bali for another day, but apparently that was not on the card. So here I am. Hold on, where am I? Okay, great. So what I wanted to talk to you today, although Peter has covered so many things so well, I'm probably going to be echoing a little bit of what he said. But a lot of the work that we've done at KPMG at the moment, where you would all be painfully aware of productivity is a term that comes up time and time again in the context that Australia has performed quite badly over the last decade. And it is a very critical subject and one which ties in very nicely to the teleworking story. So what I want to talk to you today is what the economic role of teleworking is, because I think it's always a much more powerful argument with politicians if you can say, and the benefit is so many $1 billion, that tends to prick their ears up just a little bit more than this is socially good or has a good social justice outcome. I'm going to talk particularly about a couple of case studies on where you can see specific impacts for productivity and participation, the two elements of making growth better, growth prospects better, sorry, and then talking finally about, which Peter also alluded to, having the right infrastructure there. Now, you'll probably find that a lot of what I say this afternoon is going to be a little bit focused on the benefits. There are, of course, some issues around, do you miss out on the water cooler chat, for example? And I'm not going to dwell on those this afternoon. Interestingly enough, I find when I work from home, and often I do so because I want to remove myself from distraction so I can get my head down and really write. Sorry? Is that better? Ah, there you go. Good thing I have good voice projection anyway. So I find that I like to remove myself from distractions if I'm trying to write something and I really need to concentrate hard. I have a very small team, but a very collaborative team, and when we're talking through our economic problems and challenges in the course of a day, part of solving those is being able to get ideas, bounce them around, and talk to each other. And the idea that you don't have that interaction when you're located somewhere else, to me, is just wrong, and it's certainly not my experience. At KPMG, we have something called Instant Messenger, which I guess a lot of people will have similar. And I'm constantly at home. Sometimes I have to disable it so that people can't just talk to me if I really want to switch myself off. But I can be having multiple conversations. You have to be very careful who you reply to when you hit that message back, if you've got multiple going. But there are ways around this, and I think there are the technologies such as Skype where we can be more engaged. Clearly, Peter's had that experience with Infoxchange, and I think, yes, there are some problems, but they are not, they're not ones that we can't overcome. As for spending your time deciding whether you want to take something from the fridge or not, I perhaps have the reverse experience in that my other half and my family get very cranky with me for it's like, can you just turn the phone off? Can you turn your email off? And in fact, I think the experience of a lot of people who do regularly work from home is that as Peter said, you have that problem switching off, not that you're skiving. It's quite the opposite effect. So I think we have some cultural challenges to overcome to really see this thing take off and to reap the full economic benefits. So just to set the scene a little bit and talk about what's been going on in the productivity debate. And what this chart shows you, I'll try not to be too economics technical this afternoon, but we're looking at what drives gross incomes. So this is not just what's happening to GDP, but actually how that money is able to be spent. So it takes account of the exchange rate and the relative value of what a dollar you earn can buy you. And if you have a look at that chart, you'll see that you compare the last 2 full decades, and you'll see we've had an increase in national income, which is great, but that's been driven by a number of factors. One has been a slight shift in the population, and the other significant factor has been an increase in the terms of trade, which means that we can now buy lots more plasma screens from Asia for each tonne of iron ore exported than we could 10 years ago. But what you will see also is that although labour productivity still increased in that decade, it's actually been declining as a contributor to growth, and more importantly, participation in the workforce has declined, which, when you think about social trends, is actually a little bit counterintuitive. But one thing that chart doesn't really show you, just comparing big chunks of time, is what's been happening over economic cycles, because productivity and participation are influenced by how strong the economy is. So if you want to try and extrapolate from that and to understand what's really going on, this chart shows you the last 5 clear economic cycles, the last one being only 4 years, the other previous three being 5 years each. And what you can see from there is that participation is actually, the trend is actually a little bit higher, which is what you would expect. You'd be thinking that more people would be wanting to join the workforce, but that labour productivity has been significantly declining. Population as a contributor to our incomes has been roughly the same. What you should take away from that is that given that we are not going to see the increase in the terms of trade that we have just experienced over the last decade repeated in the coming decade, if we don't want to experience living standards and incomes decline, we need to use population participation productivity to improve our living standards. Obviously, population is a slightly politically contentious issue, and you wouldn't expect that to be changing to any significant degree in the coming decade. So the focus needs to be on productivity and also participation. That just shows you what productivity has been doing over recent cycles. This is from a Productivity Commission research paper that came out earlier this year. And a great quote, which actually is over a decade old, from Nobel laureate Paul Krugman, that productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's nearly everything. If we are going to improve our living standards, we have to be able to be more productive with what we've got. And to me, one of the biggest challenges for productivity, we've done big reforms in workplace relations, in taxation, maybe not as far as we'd like to go, but the big policy agendas have already been played out in the 80s and 90s. So to me, where the real productivity drivers will come from in the coming decade is from technology and the use of technology. And obviously, teleworking is a part of that story. Just again, looking at what's happened to participation, you can see that it's probably, I can find it's actually bottomed off a little bit here, and that's the global financial crisis getting in the way. But even so, the projections from the government, from the intergenerational report, suggest that with an ageing population, we're going to have fewer and fewer people in the workforce that are, if we don't do something about changing workplace practices. And I think that's, obviously a critical, again, role. Peter mentioned about more elderly people being willing to stay on in the work if they could telework. Well, that's something we need to think about. Why does it matter? Well, I like to show this chart to scare people, and it's a little bit busy. The Reserve Bank, when they put out charts, always like to put lots of lines in them. But the thing that you need to look at first is this purple line, and you have a look at what's happened to our manufacturing sector over the last couple of decades, really. And it's a pretty sorry story. Why has this happened? Because we have become less and less competitive. And it's not just about a strong Australian dollar. It's about an increasingly educated and productive workforce in Asia. Now, I hope most of you saw the paper that came out. It was released by the government a couple of weeks back, Australia in the Asian Century. And it talks about the 5 pillars of productivity as launching us forward. And one of those pillars is innovation. Again, telework ties nicely into that story. We need to use every angle that we possibly can to improve productivity in the coming decade, and in fact beyond that, for as long as we can, to make sure that we maintain competitiveness in the areas where we still have some comparative advantage. Because Asia is a fantastic opportunity, but is also a very large threat to our economy if we aren't matching what's being achieved there. So what is teleworking? I think this is a really important discussion, and Peter alluded to it a little bit. And we tend to think about it being, mums staying at home to be able to have more flexible work arrangements. But clearly it's gone well beyond that. And it's not just working at home. There's regional centres and hubs. When I was in London recently, I walked past a pub and it's, teleworking facilities here. I wasn't quite sure whether they were serious or not. But it's offering people the ability to work in different ways. You don't have to be in the main head office of an organisation. And that's what we're defining telework as. It may not necessarily be just working from home. It's a broader definition. And I think that's really important when you're talking about what this might enable down the track. And if you're actually also looking at some of the things that were presented as challenges, having regional hubs or shared office facilities in a regional centre where people can come in and work together and collaborate if they need to, that again is just as effective as possibly more so than working from home. So it's a range of different aspects there. Again, I'm not going to labour on the benefits of teleworking. We already heard from the Minister some of the numbers that are out there, and this is a subject which has been well studied by economists, psychologists, demographers, all sorts of people over the last 20 to 30 years, in fact, is how long it's been considered an actual concept. But obviously, from an economic and from an individual perspective, again, Peter mentioned the ability to recruit and retain staff. In this day and age, I have a lot of Gen Ys in my team, and they do think differently. In fact, I have 3 children who classify as Gen Y as well. They act differently, they think differently, and at times I get a little bit frustrated and go, they've got to fit in with our ways. But realistically, if you want to retain and attract good workers, you are going to have to be operating at their level and in their language. And if teleworking is something that they can relate to, this is the switched-on generation, we have to be operating to something that they can do, that they're engaged with. And obviously teleworking enables that a little bit better. So it's both good for the economy and for the individual. Talked about absenteeism and presenteeism. I don't think I've had a sick day since I've, in the last 2 years anyway, since I've been at KPMG, because even though I don't go into the office to spread my germs, invariably emails come through and you end up doing things which may be a bad thing for my personal health, but it's certainly in terms of, people come into the office with a cold and a sniffle and then it goes around everybody else, or a virus. The fact that you can work to the extent that you're still capable from home means that you're more productive and you're not passing your germs around. Presenteeism costs the economy. KPMG did a study a couple of years ago, up to $8 billion. That's a lot of dollars, with people turning up and they're not performing at their best, predominantly through health reasons. So presenteeism as much as absenteeism are significant factors that telework can again help with. We talked about reduced commuting time and time and money that's associated with that, and not only just for the individual but for the economy as a whole. Obviously, if there's less traffic on the road, in terms of logistics and supply, the trucks get more quickly to the shops where they need, or the factories where they need to get to. So that's pretty much a no-brainer. Obviously, from an environmental perspective, that's very important as well. One of the other things, interestingly enough, we're doing some work in modelling the impacts of extreme climate events at the moment. And if you have a look at what happened in Melbourne in 2009 with an extreme heat event, which is forecast again to happen in January 2013, so be prepared. If you have a look at the billions of dollars in lost production because electricity supply went out, so there's no trams, there's no trains for a while. A lot of the time, people that are caring for elderly or younger people, there's an increased sickness, and so more people, carers, have to stay at home for longer periods. There are all sorts of disruptions to supply. If your people can't get to the workforce where they need to be, having telework-enabled facilities for them means that you're going to be less impacted by those extreme climate events than your competitors who are not, or others who are not. Again, as I said, so part of that is not just getting traffic off the road, but it's also getting pollution off the road. I think telework also is part of that story, is a technology story. And we mentioned cloud computing before. My team conducted a study into the economic benefits of cloud computing, which was released earlier this year, that looked at the long-run benefits of if you had about 75% take-up of cloud across the economy, you could expect to increase GDP by around $3 billion a year, long-run GDP. That's just one form of technology. But the thing that interested me most about the cloud computing was that the companies that we spoke to that embraced cloud said it was not just about the cost savings, it was about, funnily enough, increased collaboration, increased ideas, increased agility. All of the criticisms that you get from teleworking is, oh, we don't have this collaboration. Funnily enough, cloud computing that enabled people to access their work and their systems from anywhere improved the collaboration rather than reduced it. Increased participation in the workforce obviously is one a critical one as well, and particularly for the third sector. You represent those that are most disadvantaged in life. And if somebody who is disabled physically or who is elderly, who have physical constraints to getting to work, or even just those who live in areas that are further away from the city, then this is a social issue as much as an economic issue. Obviously, as was reported before, job satisfaction, work-life balance. I'm not sure about the work-life balance, but potentially it's there, and reduced office space requirements. If you need a smaller footprint for your office, smaller amounts of energy use, obviously you're going to be saving costs as well. The offside to that is that you have to have appropriate health and safety regulations and rules to make sure that your workers, while they're working at home, are in fact safe as well. That's a very important factor. Let's keep my eye on the time. So I've mentioned teleworkers helping with economics. Well, here's one particular way that they can, is with the ageing of the workforce. If you have a look at the 55 to 64-year-old cohort, workforce participation, now this compares from the productivity pulled together these figures some time ago now, but they haven't changed dramatically, I believe. So if you have a look at the OECD average, it's quite low going across countries. But if you look at the best performers in the OECD, and you look at where Australia is, right down the bottom there, we have a long way to go. And if we just could lift our rate for that age group alone to where New Zealand is, we actually get a massive, massive increase in productivity and GDP, up to over 1.5%, close to 1.5%. Those numbers, when you start to add them all up, little ways to improve productivity from each of the subcomponents of teleworking, starts to add up to very, very large numbers indeed. And the thing is, there are lots of people out there, as you guys would be well aware, representing the third sector, who actually would like to be in work, but can't because of physical constraints to getting to where they need to get. And I'm not going to read out all of these, but I think you'll have copies of the presentation with you. And I think if you just look at the third dot point, though, which to me is the most interesting, I guess, here, being an economist, like, as I said, I like to have numbers attached to things. If we took 45,000 people with a disability and allowed them to work as they would like to work, we could be adding close to 10 billion to the economy, 1% of GDP. That's, again, you start adding each of these little components up, and teleworking paints a very compelling economic story. The other is looking at, as Peter mentioned, regional Australia. To me, I started thinking about this issue as there's a lot of skills out in regional Australia that we could be accessing. There's skills shortages reported almost everywhere. There's a shortage of economists all over Australia, apparently, which should be good for my next round of negotiations, but Malcolm. But seriously, but it actually seems to me that there's actually more regional people who can't access the work that they want. Now, we all know what the pressures on not only house prices are, but on property prices generally, the cost of rent, particularly for a startup business. If you can decentralise and have your workers come to work virtually, no matter where you are, it's going to be a much more competitive story for you and a much happier and more productive story for them. I know there's a consideration for a private hospital be built out in Melbourne near the airport at the moment. The demographic surveys show that there's an awful lot of nurses who would not have to, if they could work in a regional centre, would be much better off. Reducing the commute time, making the jobs available no matter where you are. If you can do that remotely, it doesn't matter where a physical presence of your office is, and that's pretty obvious. I think if you have a look at the change in employment by sector, particularly with healthcare, yes, it's true that you can't perform, heart bypass surgery via teleworking. At least we don't have the robotic capability just yet. Probably will about 50 years from now, if not before. But there are, and you'll see when I get to my case studies, there are lots of ways in which e-health enables remote access to health services in many ways that are a great improvement on the current arrangements. If you think about particularly the elderly who might use a GP as a little bit of a social trip, if you have a network that enables somebody to touch a screen, to check in once a day, to have a bit of a conversation, to give it a bit of an eyeball, which you can't do obviously on a telephone conversation, and you can see that person, it enables you to, a nurse or a GP, any sort of health professional, to actually be far more engaged with their client on a more frequent basis at a very significantly lower cost. I hope you can read this. This is from my colleague Bernard Salt, who's a demographer, and one of the things he talks about quite a lot at the moment is the demand from the mining sector. So fly in, fly out workforce has become increasingly used because the mining sector cannot access, people are just not willing to move to the Pilbara. Part of that, or other remote locations, part of that is because there's not significant infrastructure been invested, so housing is far more expensive in the Pilbara than it is in most parts of Sydney, which is just crazy when you think about it. So companies like Rio are addressing this through, and I'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute, with remote workers. But we have this inability in Australia to move, and Bernard talks about, well, people are less willing to move when times are tough, and obviously as we've been through the global financial crisis, there is some uncertainty. But I think when you think about the opportunities that are there in the mining sector, you'd expect there'd be a lot more migration as people took up those very well-paid opportunities. I know the guy who used to run the school band at one of my kids' schools was a qualified engineer by trade and ended up back in a gold mine out in Western New South Wales because the lure of the dollar was just too high, despite his passion for music and music education. But we just have this divide, and there is a big cultural divide between the east and west of Australia. As anybody who has moved to the West Coast will tell you, you're considered a blow and you think country towns are bad. You know, Perth makes it, there is a cultural divide there and people do find it difficult. So if we're going to address this problem, short of giving people counselling as to how, you know, why they should be more mobile, we need to actually address this in a more flexible and thoughtful way. And again, teleworking provides not all the answers, but at least some of the answers. Coming back to the working age population, I talked about the ageing workforce. This one comes from the white paper again. If you have a look at the yellow line, which is where Australia's workforce is over the next decade or so, if you have a look, we've got starting to decline already. And this is not talking way out in the future. This is now where we're facing these issues. So we need to find as many ways as we can to keep the older workers in the workforce for longer. And if that's elderly, then that's fine too. The other thing we're facing is a significant fiscal problem. You know, the deficit and the budget come up time and time again, particularly in light of what's been happening in Europe. If you have a look at what the intergenerational report says is going to happen to our budget deficit, irrespective of no policy changes now, just having this change of an ageing population, you have a look at what's going to happen to our budget deficit as a percent of GDP just because of the change. It's basically increase in health and ageing services and associated costs of having an ageing population, fewer people in the workforce, lower tax receipts, higher pensions, and so on. That's a pretty significant deterioration that we're seeing in the next 20 to 30 years. If we're going to do something to address that, and that's a long-term fundamental change, if we're going to do something to address that, then we need to do it now, and we need to talk about having increased participation and getting people to stay in the workforce longer. If you have a look, as I mentioned before, if you can improve workforce participation and productivity such that it leads to a 1% increase in GDP, you know, we're talking about savings for the budget deficit of, in current dollar terms, of around $3 billion and $4 billion next year. That's a very big increase, and obviously those numbers get bigger and bigger as you go out in time. So I just wanted to quickly wrap up because I'm running out of time. Very quickly, a couple of case studies that we looked at. One of the really interesting ones that my colleague, who's a health economist, went to talk to these guys the other day, and this is an online imaging company, and increasingly, I can think of nothing worse than spending all day staring at ultrasounds and scans all day long, but these people are in a hub and they don't have to be at the hospital. So this is where teleworking is a little bit different. It's more remote working. So these people are gathered together. They can confer with each other. They're radiologists and radiographers together looking at the output. This operates 24/7. So you have a workforce in Australia, in Sydney, and a workforce in London and the UK. So that any time, day or night, a hospital that needs an urgent decision can get that decision. And the results have been absolutely astounding in terms of getting back to the patient. Now you imagine what that does in lowering health costs, increasing your productivity. The numbers are quite startling. And I won't go through all of that again, you can read it later because we're running out of time. But interestingly, you know, outpatient scans taking 26 days to process, now taking 2.5 days. When those sorts of numbers are fantastic. So that's a slightly different form of teleworking. Pharmacare, Aspen Pharmacare again is another one that uses telework very frequently to promote flexible work practices, and has found that for them it's about retaining really good staff, and that is absolutely critical. If you have high levels of staff turnover, you have less loyalty, you have increased training costs, you have all sorts of increased on-costs associated with every time you turn over staff, whether it's recruitment costs or not. And that means that you know, being able to telework, to have that retained workforce. You know, I love the fact that they've got an 83-year-old there. I want to know what he or she does, but I think it's just, you know, fantastic that this is saying we don't all have to be, you know, 20 and groovy. We can make a meaningful contribution to society throughout our life. Unity 4, and I think somebody from Unity 4 is actually here. So again, it's about workforce participation. So parents with young kids, semi-retirees, allowing people to stay in the workforce in increasingly flexible ways, allows us to have access to a greater workforce with the right skill set where and when they want to be. In a fairly muddling along economy, we have unemployment of only just 5 and a bit %. If we start to get up to the levels we were pre the GFC again, we're going to have increasing skill shortages. And these sorts of things are going to become increasingly critical as we do that, unless we're prepared to open the immigration floodgates, which politically I suspect we're not going to. Lower staff turnover, again, between 200 and 300% less than the rest of, than the average for the industry. Absolutely amazing in terms of cost savings. Westpac, I love this story too, and obviously Gail Kelly does an awful lot of telecommuting. I suspect once she's got home and put her 4 kids to bed at night, she's probably back online again. And as so many of us are, the fact that you can go home at a reasonable hour, have interaction with your family, have dinner together, and then later at night you can get back to doing some things, and often in the quiet time, which is helpful. But if you look, they've got almost double the level of senior staff that are female for the industry average. And speaking as someone who spent, well over 20 years in the financial services sector, there are far too women represented. And it's one of those sectors where you are expected to be available 24/7, and because the economy the world doesn't stop for you or your family. And so being able to use teleworking to mean that you're connected but you're still involved with both your work life and balance is critically important. And I think that will be a big enabler for increased female participation in the workforce, which is something I haven't really talked about today, but that again, still a big shift up of, Australia should be moving up. And finally, Rio Tinto, which I think is, a fantastic example. We talk a lot at KPMG about the driverless trains being enacted, but it goes well beyond that. And if you go to Rio's website, there's some fantastic information there, some videos that show you the sorts of things that they're enabling because they cannot get the staff that they need on the ground, and this is their response. The other great thing is that they're also saving an awful lot of money. Mining sector costs have blown out of all proportion. Commodity prices are starting to come back, so they need to do something to address skills shortage, cost blowouts, and remote access is the way that they're going to do it. They can have somebody driving their trains in the Pilbara, sitting in an office, air-conditioned office in Perth, and that's a win-win situation for everybody all around. Just to have a quick look at a recent study that was done to have a look at what the impact of, I talked about the role of technology in enabling productivity gains. This was a World Bank study that was done. So for every 10% increase that you get in these different types of, this was just access to the internet, was the corresponding increase in GDP. Obviously broadband over 1%, which is a very significant increase. And that is critical. As Peter mentioned, there's no point in having telework if you don't actually have the infrastructure to support telework. So it is very, very important that we have a high quality, reliable, ubiquitous network that allows people to telework from wherever they are. I would suggest that we don't quite have that yet. And finally, just to sum up, what I'd say to you all is that teleworking has changed in its definition. It's much, much broader, and it's a much greater enabler than we thought in the past. It's not just about mums staying at home with their babies. It's about enabling all sorts of people to work from where and when they would like. There are productivity benefits that are associated with this, and there are other economic benefits in terms of not only increased productivity, but increased participation in the workforce, which will help us as we go forward with an ageing population that's putting increased pressure on the budget. So teleworking is not only good for the individual, it is actually good for the economy as a whole. It's not to say it isn't without difficulties and that there are still challenges to face, but on the whole, it's an important step in enabling productivity and participation and improved growth over the coming decade. Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Thank you. As always, Nikki gives you fantastic value, masses of stuff in there. Some of it pretty scary, some of it very hopeful. The most notable one I took from that is you don't have to be 20 and groovy. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. So look, we've got time just for a couple of quick questions because Nikki has to run along in her busy schedule, more people to see. Yes, a question right at the back. If you just wait for the mic, because hang on, the people in Bolivia won't be able to hear you.
I forgot about that.
I'm just wondering whether you've seen any good examples of teleworking in education?
I haven't seen any specific examples, except to say that I think that if you look at the amount of online learning that is now taking place, I think that is going to be an increasingly frequently used form of education. And we've traditionally seen it as you access the service through, it used to be through paper being sent to you in the post. And I think University of New England is a great example of this, where they've had remote learning for a very long time, small scheduled sessions of a week or so in situ, but basically everything correspondence. Now you've got the ability, we talk about increasingly overcrowded lecture theatres. There's no reason why, with telecommunications being the way they are, why a lecturer can't be standing anywhere in the world giving a presentation, an interactive presentation. And I think if you look at the white paper again for the Asian century, it talks about the shortage of skilled language teachers in Australia. And one way to overcome that challenge is to pair with schools in Asia, and they will teach our kids the relevant language, and presumably we'll do the quid pro quo of teaching them. So I think I haven't seen very much of it in place now, but absolutely there is no reason why it shouldn't be enabled at all.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, one there.
Thanks, Nikki. Robert Morsillo, Telstra, actually. My question's general, though. I mean, in terms of your studies and so on, has there been any analysis of, there's great benefits from teleworking, but an analysis of how those benefits get shared between employee and employer?
The focus has been very much up till now on the employee or economy-wide benefits in terms of, reduced traffic congestion and pollution, CO2 emissions, that sort of thing. I think now we're starting to turn the focus on what the benefit to the employer is. So you saw Senator Conroy referred to the study that was done recently by Stanford that said the increase in productivity is 13%, and that's to the benefit of the firm. It might be for the benefit of the employer that they feel that they're getting more done. There was Peter's quote, I go to the office and I get nothing done for 4 hours. I think we all probably know that feeling a little bit. So have there been a lot of studies done? No. The tool that, again, the Senator referred to is a very high-level tool, so it's not really enabling you to do that. And I think this is the next... We've had a whole series of different studies done over the last 20 to 25 years that have focused on different aspects. A lot of them have been social, a lot of them have been demographic, some high-level economics, but I think now we'll start to see what is it that a firm actually gets out of its workforce. But I think, obviously, in terms of having a person who's spending more time at work rather than commuting, doing their job, you'd hope that they would be more productive in those hours. So not yet, but I think that's where the debate is now heading, is what does the firm get out of it? And certainly in terms of reduced level of floor space and operating costs across the economy, there have been studies done on those across the economy, but it's taking into account the firm level benefits. But I would be recommending to every company that they look at, as with any decision that you make, if you're going to invest in teleworking or anything at all, you should be looking at what is the return on investment. If I put in the right levels of software and support for my workforce, what will I be getting back from it as well? You should be looking closely at that.
Yeah, it's a whole other area of discussion, but I think it was interesting, Nikki, when you talked about technology being at the core of productivity improvements in the future. And one of the things I think about quite a lot is, what is the micro benefit of me being able to respond to an email query from a client at 11 o'clock at night in 30 seconds? A lot of the things now are very, very micro, and it's much harder to measure those than it is from, we're going to outsource part of our business and you can do a pre-state and a post-state. A lot of these things are very micro, and I think there's a way to go in being able to measure those. That's for another day. We are now cutting into tea time for those of us physically in the room. Now, look, there'll be quite a lot of you who don't know people here, so I'd like to offer you this icebreaker should you need one. Australia is apparently in the grip of a chronic shortage of economists. This is a terribly worrying thing for our society. Discuss. Okay, there you go. That's your icebreaker. Please be back for 10 to 3. And one final thing. Happy birthday, Nikki.